The desert did not welcome visitors, least of all a column of trucks dragging supplies through wind that shaved the skin like broken glass. Yet the Canadian military pattern truck pushed forward, its angular cab and stubborn engine forcing a path through heat that warped metal and patience alike. Crews clung to it because nothing else lasted this long so far from home. Its ladder-frame chassis handled punishment that fractured lesser vehicles. Even the sand seemed to give up arguing with it after a few miles. It was never graceful, but it always arrived. And in war, that was everything. The story of the Canadian military pattern truck begins with a problem that stretched across continents like a frayed cable. When war arrived in 1939, the Allies needed vehicles that could cross deserts, mountains, marshes and mud with equal stubbornness. Britain's existing fleet was a patchwork of civilian conversions, privately built lorries and commercial types never meant to carry the weight of a global conflict. The strategic situation was dire. Too many designs, too few parts, and a supply chain tied in knots. Canadian industry was untouched by bombing and possessed the standardised manufacturing culture the British war effort urgently required. Here lay the solution: a single family of trucks built to a shared pattern yet adaptable enough to serve in every theatre. The idea sounds simple now, but at the time it was revolutionary, an industrial answer to a logistical nightmare. The engineering need was no less urgent. British trucks struggled with the heat load of North Africa, choking on dust through inadequate filters and suffering cracked radiators under sustained desert stress. The CMP concept demanded a robust cooling system, deep louvered grills, and the use of oil bath air cleaners that allowed crews to maintain airflow with minimal tools even in a sandstorm. The chassis needed high ground clearance, an attribute civilian lorries simply lacked, and sufficient torsional flexibility to survive cross-axle punishment without rupturing welds. The doctrinal gap was wider still. The British Army required radio trucks, ambulances, water carriers, troop transports and gun tractors, but none shared common parts. CMP standardization created interchangeable components, axles, gearboxes, brake parts, and electrical fittings that could be replaced anywhere from Alexandria to Rangoon. This transformed repair logistics. Depots no longer needed to stock dozens of incompatible spares. And then came the political dimension. Producing CMP trucks gave Canada a decisive industrial role in the war, binding its factories to Britain's strategic heartbeat. The Dominion became a manufacturing colossus almost overnight, proving that design unity could overpower the chaos of wartime distribution. As one quartermaster put it, the CMP wasn't designed to be pretty, just to survive every terrible idea a field commander might have. Its success stemmed from that very expectation, a vehicle built first for the war's reality, not its brochures. The resulting machine would reshape Allied mobility for years without announcing itself as anything more than a squarish truck that refused to quit. The vision behind the Canadian military pattern truck began in offices filled with maps, cigarette smoke, and the growing worry that the British Empire's far-flung forces were being served by vehicles older than some of their drivers. Engineers, logisticians, and commanders understood that a modern war required something more than patched-up commercial chassis. They needed a unified blueprint, something durable, adaptable, and manufacturable at scale across oceans. The idea was deceptively disciplined, a modular truck family built around common cabs, consistent drivetrains, and a shared electrical system. The standardization allowed bodies to vary widely, from wireless boxes to water bowsers, while the underlying mechanical heart remained familiar to any mechanic trained on the pattern. This was not designed for elegance, but for continuity under stress. 3 technical debates shaped the final concept. First was the cabin layout. Britain preferred right-hand drive for convoy discipline, while Canada favoured left-hand drive for domestic familiarity. The compromise was pure wartime pragmatism. Vehicles would be right-hand drive, allowing British doctrine to prevail across all theatres. Second was the cooling question. Should the new truck rely on pressurised systems like some US vehicles, or adopt a simpler atmospheric system less prone to field failure? Engineers chose the latter, prioritising survivability over performance margins. Third came the suspension decision. Semi-elliptic leaf springs were retained due to their proven endurance under rough road conditions, even though they offered a harsher ride than coil or torsion bar alternatives. The blueprint's success also hinged on the now famous Cab 11, Cab 12, and later Cab 13 designs. These angular, almost fortress-like bodies were not born from aesthetics, but from steel press limitations, production speed, and ease of repair. Flat panels could be replaced rapidly, and visibility was kept deliberately generous to assist drivers navigating desert tracks or jungle cuttings. Their unmistakable silhouette became an Allied trademark wherever supplies were needed most. One designer later joked that the cab shape was chosen because it could be drawn accurately by anyone with a ruler and a hangover. For once, wartime humour concealed a deeper truth. Simplicity was a virtue when factories had to work day and night. The CMP's vision rested on clarity, a truck that could be trusted by drivers, repaired by fitters, and built by factories that had never imagined supplying half the world's battlefronts. It was a design philosophy that traded refinement for endurance, precisely what the moment demanded. Factories across Canada thundered into life as the Canadian military pattern truck entered full production. Rows of presses flattened steel into precise cab panels with a rhythm that felt almost industrially ceremonial. The war demanded numbers, and the numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of chassis, axles and transmissions rolled from lines that had never before been tested at this scale. The transformation of peacetime industry into a logistical engine was as important as any battle plan. The build process focused on mechanical discipline. One key requirement was consistent axle geometry, critical for convoy handling across unpredictable terrain. Jig fixtures ensured alignment stayed within tight tolerances, preventing lateral wander when trucks carried heavy loads over rutted tracks. A second engineering priority was gearbox durability. Cast iron housings, helical gears, and robust selectors enabled smooth engagement even when dust infiltrated the mechanism. Third came electrical standardization. 6-volt systems were chosen for reliability, simplicity, and the availability of spares across Allied depots, allowing radios, lamps, and ignition components to be serviced rapidly. Assembly lines were deliberately arranged for modularity. Chassis frames moved on skids rather than suspended lines, giving teams space to work on spring hangers, brake linkages, and cross members without interruption. Once the frame reached the drivetrain station, engines were lowered in using adjustable beam cranes designed for quick swaps should an engine fail inspection. The engines themselves, typically Ford V8s or Chevrolet 216 inline-sixes, were tested on dynamometers before installation, ensuring torque curves met specification even under wartime pressure. Interior fittings were equally utilitarian. Floors were steel rather than wood to reduce fire risk and improve longevity. Instrument panels used simple, large-faced gauges readable through vibration. Door hinges, window winders, and even seat frames were stamped from patterns that could be reproduced in multiple plants without deviation. This allowed a truck built in Ontario to be repaired with parts shipped from a facility in Manitoba without compatibility issues. Painting lines applied desert sand, olive drab or camouflage patterns depending on destination. Paint was not cosmetic. It formed an anti-corrosion layer that protected steel in climates ranging from Saharan heat to Burmese humidity. Trucks emerged from the final inspection bay with toolkits, spare filters, and lubrication charts clipped behind the driver's seat, everything needed to keep them operational far from workshops. A fully assembled CMP had all the elegance of a steel wardrobe on wheels, but it behaved far better than one when the road disappeared. What mattered was that every bolt, spar, and panel had been built with a single purpose: endurance under pressure. And with each completed truck, the Allied supply chain grew just a little stronger. Field testing the Canadian military pattern truck was an exercise in discovering just how hostile the world could be to machinery. Trial vehicles were driven through wadis, across cratered tracks, and into mud that pulled at tires like a living thing. Every test route pushed the chassis to reveal weaknesses before enemy action could exploit them. Engineers documented front axle twisting, brake fade under steep descents, and the impact of vibration on cab fittings, all feeding improvements into subsequent production runs. Reliability trials focused heavily on cooling performance. In desert conditions, engines were run at sustained high RPM to ensure radiators maintained temperature margins even when airflow was partially obstructed by sand. Tests revealed that the oil bath air filters prevented the catastrophic dust ingestion common in earlier British trucks, extending engine life and reducing field overhauls. A second insight came from suspension tests. Semi-elliptic leaf springs generated predictable rebound characteristics, letting drivers anticipate handling even on broken surfaces. Third, fuel system integrity was scrutinized. Tanks were fitted with reinforced seams to prevent leaks when trucks were jolted or landed hard after crossing trenches. Crew reactions were measured as carefully as mechanical performance. Test drivers navigated steep angles to evaluate visibility through the CMP's flat glass windscreen and wide cab openings. The boxy design unexpectedly assisted spatial judgment. Its straight lines gave drivers a reliable sense of where the front corners sat when squeezing through narrow defiles or aligning for river crossings. Tests also examined ergonomics under long hours. Seating posture, pedal spacing, and steering column vibration all received adjustments as a result of early field feedback. Documentation from these trials grew into a sizable reference library. Every worn gear tooth, cracked spring shackle, and overheated bearing was photographed, logged, and analyzed. Such discipline reduced the number of future failures in operational service, allowing depots to plan spares distribution with remarkable precision. It was not glamorous work, but it directly translated into frontline reliability. The environmental extremes offered their own lessons. Tracks in Tunisia clogged with fine dust that clung to every mechanical surface, while European winter trials produced ice that stiffened grease and exposed lubrication weaknesses. Testing teams rotated trucks rapidly, subjecting each to repeated punishment until patterns emerged. One observer remarked that the CMP didn't so much pass its trials as outlast the conditions trying to defeat it. The outcome was a truck whose performance had been proven not just by design intention, but by relentless examination in some of the harshest environments available. The war would soon reveal just how valuable that preparation had been. When the Canadian military pattern truck moved from field trials into full operational service, the results were immediate and unmistakable. It transformed the mobility of units that previously depended on an assortment of aging lorries, each with unique quirks and incompatible parts. In North Africa, Italy, Burma, Northwest Europe and post-war Indonesia, the CMP demonstrated a rare quality for wartime machinery, predictable behavior under unpredictable conditions. Its impact rippled far beyond the workshops that maintained it. The breakthrough rested on performance under load. CMP trucks frequently hauled weights that matched or exceeded their rated capacities, yet retained steering authority and braking consistency thanks to their well-balanced chassis geometry. Three technical qualities proved decisive. First, the wheelbase-to-track ratio gave excellent stability on narrow or muddy tracks, limiting the tendency to sink or roll. Second, the low-range gearing allowed controlled climbs on steep gradients without overspeeding the engine or overheating the clutch. Third, the robust transfer case ensured that four-wheel drive variants maintained traction even when one wheel lost purchase on loose soil or broken pavement. In convoy operations, the CMP's success became even more apparent. Standardization meant drivers could swap vehicles mid-mission without relearning controls or instrument layouts. Fuel consumption, although not light, was consistent enough to allow planners to calculate resupply intervals with dependable accuracy. Spares depots benefited from the interchangeability designed into the truck. A broken brake cylinder in Italy could be replaced with stock shipped originally for a unit in Egypt, reducing downtime and keeping convoys moving during critical offensives. There were failures too, and they mattered. Rear spring hangers sometimes suffered stress fractures when subjected to repeated heavy impacts. Electrical connections corroded rapidly in tropical humidity, requiring regular cleaning to maintain ignition reliability. In cold climates, gearbox oil thickened enough to cause stiff shifting until crews pre-warmed components with portable stoves or by idling the engine for extended periods. These weaknesses did not undermine the CMP's reputation, but they shaped maintenance routines across entire theatres. Strategic commanders valued the CMP for its effect on operational tempo. Faster delivery of ammunition, fuel and rations meant frontline units could sustain advances that would previously have stalled. The truck also supported specialized roles: radio vans, artillery tractors, water carriers, and mobile workshops all owed their existence to the adaptability of the shared CMP chassis. Its versatility became part of the Allied logistical rhythm, feeding operations with a steady flow of supplies that often determined the pace of battle. It was said that the CMP moved armies not by force, but by simply refusing to stop when everything else did. The breakthroughs it delivered were measured not in headlines, but in miles. Miles gained, miles supplied, and miles endured, until the war's final phase brought new challenges and new consequences for the machine that kept those miles possible. The Canadian military pattern truck reshaped far more than battlefield supply lines. Its presence influenced economics, logistics doctrine, and even the political relationships within the Allied framework. A machine built for transport unexpectedly became a catalyst for industrial alignment across continents. Factories in Canada, parts depots in Britain, assembly shops in India, and refit bases in the Middle East all synchronized around its unified design, creating a logistical ecosystem that made multinational warfare function at a scale entirely new to the era. One hidden consequence lay in maintenance philosophy. Before the CMP, many armies relied on improvisation, cannibalizing broken vehicles, machining parts on site, or modifying components to fit well enough. The CMP's interchangeability altered that mindset. Three specific changes followed. First, forward repair areas adopted structured part catalogues that mirrored the CMP's uniform architecture, reducing delays caused by guesswork. Second, the training of fitters shifted towards systematic diagnostics rather than battlefield improvisation, as the known failure modes of the CMP could be anticipated and mitigated. Third, supply officers gained the ability to track usage patterns with greater accuracy, identifying trends such as brake lining wear or fuel filter saturation long before they caused operational disruption. A second hidden effect was economic. CMP production demanded steel, rubber, electrics and machine tools on a vast scale, pulling Canadian industry into an accelerated modernization. Workshops that once built agricultural machinery now handled precision gear cutting. Factories accustomed to seasonal cycles adapted to continuous wartime production. These changes endured after 1945, powering sectors that would otherwise have taken years to develop. The CMP inadvertently laid industrial foundations that outlasted the conflict itself. Its presence even influenced infrastructure. Bridges were reinforced on key supply routes to accommodate the predictable axle loads of CMP convoys. Roads in remote areas of Southeast Asia and North Africa were graded to meet the turning circles, weight profiles, and traction characteristics of CMP-based transport columns. In several regions, the truck's dimensions effectively set a de facto template for military road planning during and immediately after the war. Operational doctrine evolved as well. With a reliable truck available in unprecedented numbers, planners could assume sustained mobility across rugged terrain, enabling deeper advances and more resilient support chains. The psychological effect on units was equally significant. Knowing that ammunition, water, or medical equipment could reach isolated platoons changed commanders' willingness to hold exposed positions or attempt long-distance moves. Propaganda departments also seized upon the CMP. Its distinctive silhouette became a visual shorthand for Allied presence in remote theatres, from Burmese jungle convoys to Dutch colonial operations in Indonesia. The truck appeared in newsreels, morale booklets and logistical briefings, symbolizing reach rather than aggression. Its greatest unseen achievement was simple. It made distance less intimidating. By shrinking the practical limits of movement, the CMP enabled armies to think differently about space, supply and endurance, an influence that continued long after the fighting stopped. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Canadian military pattern truck did not retire with them. Instead, it stepped into the tangled world of reconstruction, decolonization, and Cold War realignment with a practicality that kept it relevant long after newer trucks emerged. Entire regions rebuilt transport networks using CMP convoys because the trucks were already present in huge numbers, were mechanically familiar, and could be restored with basic tools. This afterlife was not planned, but it became one of the truck's most enduring legacies. One major post-war impact came from surplus distribution. Thousands of CMPs were redirected to Dutch, Belgian, French, British and Commonwealth units rebuilding their forces. Their standardised architecture meant that nations emerging from occupation or economic collapse could field immediately functional transport fleets without redesigning logistics systems from scratch. In Southeast Asia, CMPs became essential assets for Dutch-Indonesian operations, carrying supplies and personnel across road networks strained by climate and conflict. Their robust frames and deep gearing proved well suited to steep gradients, flooded tracks, and undeveloped routes. The second legacy came through engineering continuity. The CMP demonstrated that component commonality across multiple vehicle roles drastically reduced operational friction. 3 specific lessons shaped later military truck generations. First, modular cab construction allowed rapid variation without redesigning the entire vehicle. Second, interchangeable driveline components simplified global maintenance, making international deployments far more feasible. Third, unified electrical systems reduced training requirements and prevented the incompatibility issues that plagued earlier fleets. These principles influenced not only post-war British military vehicles, but also designs in Australia, India and Canada itself. A further ripple emerged in civilian sectors. Many surplus CMPs were converted into farm vehicles, timber haulers, or mobile workshops in regions recovering from wartime damage. Their rugged frames and forgiving engines made them ideal candidates for modification. Local fabricators replaced bodies, extended cargo beds, or fitted winches to meet local needs. This adaptability kept CMPs in service decades beyond their expected lifespan, giving them a second chapter as hard-working civilian machines. The truck also left a cultural imprint. In Europe, Asia and the Middle East, the CMP became a familiar sight during post-war reconstruction. Its distinctive square cab often appearing in early news photography of rebuilding towns, humanitarian convoys, and returning units. The silhouette that had once threaded through convoys under fire now moved quietly through villages delivering tools, timber, or medical supplies. Its longevity was almost cheeky. The CMP ignored the arrival of newer designs and carried on as if durability were a personal philosophy. For many regions, the truck became a bridge between wartime necessity and post-war normality, proving that a vehicle built for conflict could also help build peace, slowly, steadily, and with the same uncomplaining resolve it had shown on the battlefield. In the quieter years that followed the war, the Canadian military pattern truck settled into landscapes far removed from the battlefields that had shaped its reputation. The world around it changed, roads improved, borders shifted, and new machines appeared with sleeker lines and more refined engineering. Yet, the CMP continued its work with the same steady rhythm, its presence felt in remote valleys, coastal villages and military depots where the distance between places still dictated survival. It had become part of the terrain, not merely a visitor passing through it. The machine's final significance lies in what it revealed about wartime engineering discipline. The CMP was not defined by any single innovation, but by the cumulative effect of dozens of deliberate choices: robust axles, straightforward electrics, a chassis that balanced rigidity with flexibility, and an engine that could be coaxed back to life after indignities that would cripple other vehicles. These components formed a system designed to remain functional even when circumstances became unpredictable, hostile, or chaotic. Three final insights stand out. First, the truck's high ground clearance allowed it to operate in regions where infrastructure barely existed, bridging the gap between tactical need and geographic reality. Second, its mechanical simplicity encouraged generations of fitters and mechanics to develop practical skill sets grounded in direct problem-solving rather than reliance on specialist equipment. Third, its adaptability ensured that even heavily worn examples could be repurposed long after military doctrine had moved on. The CMP's enduring presence invites a reflection on movement itself. Wars often hinge on momentum, the ability to advance, retreat, or hold a position at precisely the right moment. The CMP provided that momentum not through speed, but through consistency. Its value was measured in its refusal to be stopped by mud, monsoon, frost, or fatigue. Drivers who coaxed it up steep tracks or across narrow bridges understood that progress relied on trust in a machine that delivered effort without needing attention drawn to its own workings. Even the environments it served shaped a curious equilibrium with the vehicle. In jungles, rivers washed over its tires and cabs as if the land were testing its resolve. In snowfields, frost hardened its lubricants and challenged its bearings until crews warmed them back to life. In marshes and mountain passes, the truck discovered limits yet pushed against them with the same unwavering stubbornness. The CMP offered a reminder that engineering is not just about calculation, but about perseverance where calculation ends. As decades passed, the truck's original paint faded, The panels gathered scars and its mechanisms adopted a rhythm shaped by countless journeys. Yet despite these changes, the essential character remained unchanged, a practical machine that embraced its work with an unshowy sense of purpose. Mechanical endurance became a kind of quiet philosophy, expressed not in words, but in the ability to keep moving when others faltered. Its ultimate lesson was that reliability, when repeated often enough, becomes its own form of strength. The Canadian military pattern truck carried that lesson across deserts, jungles and city streets alike, leaving a legacy defined not by spectacle, but by the simple fact that it did what it was built to do, again and again.